Welcome, everyone. Welcome to NVAHA's 20th anniversary event. I'm going to let everybody come on in and take your seats so we can get started and stay on time and have plenty of opportunity to network and celebrate after the forum. So thank you all for being here. Come on in, take a seat, and we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you. I'm going to just read it out. Oh, you're going to have it on my phone, okay. And I'm going to put them out. Okay, got it. Is that good? Okay. Yeah, I just figured that was the easiest. Yeah. Okay, no worries. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Come on in and have a seat. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. So excited to be here on NVAHA's 20th anniversary Educate and Celebrate event. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Jill Norcross, and I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. Really appreciate everybody being here today. So just a little housekeeping as you come in. There are restrooms behind the registration desk and also through the lobby on the opposite side of the elevators. There are water and snacks to tie you over in the kitchen and bar area in case you're hungry or thirsty until we get to the reception. And as far as our agenda goes, we're going to be here in this space for the 22nd annual Leckey Forum. And at 5:30, we'll break and move into the back area and outside for the reception. Then at 6:30, we will have our awards program, also in the back room, where we will honor the legacy of Congressman Jerry Conley and our important tenant advocacy partners, Bugada, Cornerstone's Opportunity Neighborhoods, Tenants and Workers United, and New Virginia Majority. Today, we celebrate 20 years of NVAHA, and I want to thank the Metropolitan Washington Bankers Group for seeing a need to encourage affordable housing development in Northern Virginia. And I also want to thank our founding executive director, Michelle Crocker, for her legacy in leading this organization for over 17 years. Our industry has seen a lot of ups and downs over the past 2 decades, the economic recession of 2008, COVID, and these uncertain times with federal cutbacks and harsh treatment of vulnerable populations. But we must recognize that our progress in meeting our affordable housing needs has been strong and steady. We know what to do going forward by learning to innovate during tough times, by speaking up for human and economic injustices, and by keeping our head down to focus on our work and people we're trying to serve. After our merger with the Alliance for Housing Solutions last year, NVAHA rebranded and modified our mission to increase supply of and equitable access to affordable housing in Northern Virginia through education, advocacy, and community partnership. And I have to emphasize the community partnership because everyone here in this room are our partners, whether you are an elected official, developer, human service provider, government staff, contractor, engineer, realtor, resident, attorney, financing partner, policymaker, rising housing leader, or advocate. You are all part of this community. With your partnership, we have grown our organization this year to meet the diverse housing needs of Northern Virginia communities through alliances that are locally responsive and regionally united. I am so proud of our expanded team. Hannah Matuda, Deputy Director, and Alexandria Alliance Director, Alice Hogan, our Arlington Alliance Director, Anika Rahman, our Fairfax Alliance Director, Amanda Corin, our Loudoun Alliance Director, and I've had the pleasure of serving as our Prince William Alliance Director. None of this would be possible without the support of our sponsors who have been with us since the beginning of NVAHA, and new sponsors who are joining us this year. We would especially like to acknowledge our lead sponsors who you will have a chance to hear from today: Amazon, the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors, and Virginia Housing. Thank you. I also want to thank and acknowledge our Leadership Council and Board of Directors who provide importance, guidance, technical assistance, and financial support. If you serve on NVAHA's Leadership Council and/or board, can you just wave and so everyone can just recognize you, and thank you. I have to thank also our fabulous meeting planners, Tia Blount and Martia Melvin of Saving Solutions. A special thanks to Hannah Matuda, whose fingerprints are literally all over everything associated with this event, and our hosts, JBG Smith, and especially Lily Goldstein and Audrey Okanya of Leo Impact Capital, JBG Smith's impact investment platform. This is world-class meeting space, and we are so fortunate to be able to use it. So living in this space between celebrating our progress and recognizing serious challenges ahead brings us to our 22nd annual Leckey Forum, where we decided to focus today on what is working in housing policy and programs around the country and here regionally. The Leckey Forum was started by the Alliance for Housing Solutions as a way to bring innovative ideas around housing affordability and inclusive neighborhoods to our region. It was named for Thomas P. Leckey, who was an Arlington civic leader and one of the founders and first president of APA, now True Ground Housing Partners. For those who are not able to attend the forum today, we will be recording it and making it available to our broader NVAHA audience. After our first fireside chat, focusing on what's working around the country, and after our second Regional Solutions panel, members of the audience will be able to ask questions using the Mentimeter program. So you will see on the screen later a Menti QR code, so where you can just take a picture of the QR code on your phone and then type in your question. And much like our Lunch and Learns, feel free to add your questions to Menti at any time during the program, and I'll moderate the Q&A after the presentations. So now I would like to welcome to the stage our lead sponsor and true example of what is working here, both regionally and across the country, through the Amazon Housing Equity Fund. Please give a warm welcome to Brianna Bledsoe, Manager of Public Policy with Amazon. Thank you.
Thank you all for the warm welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Brianna Bledsoe, and I lead state and local public policy in DC at Amazon. I've been with Amazon for nearly 3 years. I've worked in public policy for over a decade, and I've been passionate about housing for quite some time. The collapse of the housing market in 2007 is why I went to law school. It is my absolute honor to be here today celebrating NVAHA's 20th anniversary. 2 decades of incredible impact on affordable housing in Northern Virginia. Your coalition has been at the forefront of bringing together housing advocates, developers, local officials, and stakeholders to address one of our region's most pressing challenges. For 20 years, NVAHA has been a powerful voice for housing solutions that work for everyone. Through your advocacy, education, and coalition building, you've shaped policies that have made real difference in people's lives. Your commitment to creating inclusive, accessible communities where everyone has access to safe, affordable housing aligns perfectly with Amazon's own housing vision. At Amazon, we believe everyone deserves access to affordable housing, and we're committed to supporting our hometown communities. In January of 2021, we launched a $3.6 billion commitment to preserve and create more than 35,000 affordable homes across the Puget Sound, Nashville, and right here in the National Capital Region. I'm particularly proud of what we've accomplished together in Northern Virginia. Since launching our fund, we've invested more than $1.2 billion to help create or preserve over 9,400 affordable homes in the National Capital Region, positively impacting more than 20,000 residents. In Arlington alone, these investments have increased the affordable housing stock by 23% and created meaningful opportunities for families to live in the communities where they work. We believe that affordable housing and accessible transportation go hand in hand. That's why 94% of our funded affordable housing units are within walking distance of transit. In fact, we've developed over 3,000 homes in direct collaboration with transit agencies. Research by HRNA advisors estimates that households in neighborhoods where we support affordable homes have saved an average of $2,900 annually in transportation costs, savings that make a difference for working families. We have a lot to look forward to and are thrilled as we look ahead at the many projects that are before us. To help explore what's working and the solutions that are making a difference, I'm delighted to introduce those joining us today for our fireside chat, Mike Spotts and Dr. Tina Stacy. Both Mike and Dr. Stacy bring tremendous experience and expertise in housing policy to today's discussion, What is Working? Solutions in Motion. Dr. Tina Stacy is a Principal Research Associate in the Housing and Communities Division at the Urban Institute, where she specializes in urban economics, housing, and transportation. Mike Spotts is the Vice President of Real Estate Development for Habitat for Humanity of Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia, and the former founder and president of Neighborhood Fundamentals. Mike also sits on NVAHA's Board of Directors. Both of their insights will help us understand the innovative approaches that are successfully addressing housing challenges in the communities like ours. Thank you again for inviting me to join you all today. Amazon looks forward to our continued partnerships to create more affordable housing opportunities through Northern Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and we're happy to be a small piece of that unit count that Amazon's been able to support. Amazon's supporting, in the process of supporting nearly 30 units of permanently affordable homeownership opportunities in Washington, D.C. and the city of Fairfax that we're hoping to deliver in the next couple of years. So we're very appreciative of Amazon's support. Moving to our chat. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Really excited to get to talk with Tina about some of the solutions about what can work in our communities. And it's important to acknowledge, everything that's going on around us right now. We're about maybe 7.5 hours from a potential federal government shutdown. And for those of us that are practitioners in the room, that may not even rise to near the top of the list of some of the most challenging things that we're facing right now as we work to meet our mission of providing more affordable housing across the Northern Virginia region. And, it's always, we're so far removed, even though we're geographically close, where even in the best of times, we're pretty far removed from the levers of power at the federal government. There's just the gears of the bureaucracy grind so slowly. There's congressional machinations, everything like that. And it's often we can see it seems powerless, and particularly more so now. And what we want to do is use this as an opportunity to break through that feeling of being overwhelmed or paralyzed in this moment and work on what we can actually do right now to make things better. And that is the role that the Leckey Forum has always been intended to play. It's about innovative and actionable ideas, both big and small, to make our communities better. So what we're going to do today is focus on what we have the most immediate power to address, to make sure that we're coming up with solutions to the housing crisis and acting in a productive manner. And for those of us that have been part of this housing conversation for a long time, we've been talking about the importance of local policy and state policy for years. We've been saying, even in the better times, that the federal government isn't going to just come and save us from our affordable housing crisis. Yes, we can and should continue to advocate for federal policies, but both yesterday and today. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be acting locally to address what is in our most direct power. So we want to focus on action, and so there's a lot of ideas that are out there. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Some of them have varying degrees of political feasibility. And given that our time is infinite, or I'm sorry, our time is, I'm sorry, given that our time is finite, if only, given that our time is finite, and housing isn't the only thing on our plates right now, it can be difficult to know where to start, which is why I'm pleased to be talking with Tina. You've heard her bio, and one of the things that's been most fun about talking to her over the course of our respective careers in the housing space is that her core expertise is exactly what we're trying to look at right now. What's going on across the country to address our housing crisis? Who's trying what and for what reasons, and what's working? So that's why I'm very pleased to welcome her to the stage. Can everyone give her a round of applause? Thank you. And what we're going to try and get into is to try and narrow down that universe of opportunities that we could be evaluating and working on right now to give a little bit of guidance, hopefully, for what we can do to make our communities a bit better. So we do have time for Q&A. She's done a lot of research, so we're not going to be able to touch on everything. So I encourage everyone, again, to use the app, the QR code, to add your questions. And Jill will, if we don't get to something, we'll hopefully be able to get it during the Q&A session. But we hopefully you'll enjoy this conversation. So let's start with housing supply. As the housing crisis has gotten worse over the years, over the most recent 5 to 10 years, the debate has evolved about how we address the housing crisis, from just focusing on subsidies and programs to the role of supplies. Think our YIMBY versus NIMBY fights that we have at the local level. And my reading of the evidence from when I was a researcher is pretty straightforward, that you can't have affordability in a growing area without adding supply. But there's a lot more disagreement about the specific policies that will result in the type of supply growth that we need that will, A, give us units, and B, contribute to greater attainability. So I know this is an area that you have studied extensively. So would you mind giving us an overview of your research and what you found on that area?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. First off, thanks for having me here. You all are the ones doing the hard work. I just get to study it and hopefully show what an amazing impact you all are having. But I'll say, upzoning, we've been beating this drum for 10, 12 years, so it's so exciting to really see that taking shape across the nation. I will say, the detail matters, right? So the evidence is a bit mixed on what types of upzonings, what types of land use reforms are most effective at increasing supply, first off, and then also what impact that has on affordability. Really depends on the types of reforms that are passed and where they're passed, right? And so what the research, there's of course lots of evidence in both directions and all over the world, from Auckland, New Zealand to here in the US. But I think my current understanding of what we know right now is that really broad-based reforms that affect large swaths of an area, right? A whole city, a whole region, that doesn't usually happen, but a whole city, or as much of a city as you can get, where the reforms are deep enough to really, it just needs to pencil for developers, right? Whatever the new opportunity is, it needs to be able to pencil. So if you want to, say, allow plexes, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes on a single family zone, you also probably need to look at whether you need to increase density allowances and do other things that make those plexes pencil for a developer, right? Otherwise, you're not going to see that supply increase, and you're going to have wasted a lot of political capital getting that reform passed without seeing much impact. And when you do have the more spotty upzonings, in one neighborhood here or there, we're not seeing a lot of evidence that that's effective. Often, one, because they're often paired with downzonings in other areas, but also because what happens is you actually increase the land value in that area quite a lot when you upzone, right? That land all of a sudden becomes more valuable. And so you sometimes see short-term or even longer-term increases in prices when you do very spotty, smaller upzonings, right? And so I think this is a case of yes, we still want to do that. Yes, we still want to do transit-oriented development. Yes, we still want to upzone near transit, but we also need to be investing in affordable housing in those areas as well to ensure that people can remain in place and that other new residents who want to live there and benefit from it can come in as well. So I think while we're so happy that upzoning is really starting to take shape, Now we're turning into the reminder of, yes, and we need to still do more because there's a lot of other things contributing to our housing crisis as well. But I will say, give some examples, because I know that's helpful. Obviously, Minneapolis's broad-based upzoning, which included allowing plexes in single-family properties, transit-oriented development, parking minimum reductions, and minimum height requirements. There has been some recent evidence showing that those not only led to increase in supply, but also maybe mediated price increases in the area. And another one that I like to point to is California's accessory dwelling unit law. Because, while ADUs can be a great option for, people wishing to age in place, people wishing to have their kids have a place to stay if they're, just out of college and can't afford a home, to really get that ADU supply to make an impact on a region, it needs to have a lot of teeth to it, right? And so California's ADU regulation allows multiple ADUs per lot. It allows the condoization and subdivision of those ADUs. And it preempts local restrictions like excessive parking requirements or owner occupancy requirements. So we're actually seeing a lot of supply being produced by that accessory dwelling unit regulation, which you don't always see with ADU laws, right? And then last one I'll mention, because I mentioned it earlier, Auckland, New Zealand is a commonly cited place where there was a massive upzoning, right? They upzoned 75% of the land in their city. And research has been pretty promising, showing that that has led to a big increase in supply and, again, a mediation in rents. So I think, again, if we can get to these broad-based zonings that really allow for penciling for developers to develop those units that are now allowed, you can see a lot of impact.
Yeah, and I'd like to touch on that ADU point you made, because a number of the jurisdictions in our region have adopted ADU policies. And, depending on your perspective, the policy might have been acting exactly as intended, where it's not being used very much. And I personally think that having the policies that we have are better than no policies, because right now, as it is, it allows people to address niche is not the right word, but kind of bespoke situations. So if you want your parent to move in but don't want to share the actual house with them, you want to be able to rent a unit out for additional income. There are things that allow you to meet your own life situations, which is good. I think that's a very good thing. But it is not a reliable supply of affordability at scale. And ADUs were never meant to solve the housing crisis by itself, but to just illustrate how some of the, I'll call them unintended consequences of some of the policy choices that were made as part of the ADU policy is people come to us at Habitat a lot and say, well, this unit in and of itself, you can't afford to buy that right now and turn it into affordable home ownership, but maybe if you add an ADU, you can. Well, in theory, we could, but most of our local jurisdictions have adopted owner occupancy requirements for that. So in order for you to get the permit to build the ADU, you have to be an owner occupant. We're a developer. We're not an owner occupant. So we cannot get a permit to build the ADU. We can make an accessory, some call them guest houses or a shed that's functionally an ADU but is not fitted with kitchen facilities, things like that. We can even rough it in, but those are all adding extra costs, which if a homeowner is getting a private FHA loan or something like that, that increases the purchase price that they can't underwrite the revenue stream from the rental property against because they don't have a permit to rent that out. So that's just an example of how the owner-occupant rule can actually expressly inhibit the production of affordable housing, and not just sort of broad-based attainability or affordability, but actual committed affordable housing via accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, another way I like to think about, we're always trying to think about like, what are the root causes of a lot of our housing issues? And I think another thing that land use reforms, some really get to target is, it's hard to make this link, but bear with me. So, thinking about really who has control over what gets built in our neighborhoods, right? And there is starting to be some research showing that, the members of our zoning boards, okay, my colleagues did this research, I have the list, they're disproportionately non-Hispanic white residents, men, homeowners, people with legal and business occupations. Those are the people who are making our land use decisions, right? We know that the citizens who speak at planning and zoning board meetings are disproportionately older, male, longtime residents, and they're more likely to oppose new development. And so if we can think about ways to rebalance that and ensure that the people that are really making our decisions on the ground and are engaging in these decision-making processes are representative of our communities and are representative of maybe people who want to live in our communities but can't yet afford it, then we're really gonna be addressing that, like what I think of as one of the root causes of where we're at. And so land use reforms that allow for by right development and don't require as much of that, allow as much of that neighbor blocking, I think can be a good point of this and something to think about as we're considering reforms.
Right, and that's what we see a lot at the, we see this in other countries too, particularly in Europe, where your community engagement is at the neighborhood planning level, where you're coming up with neighborhood plans that define the rules of the game, and those rules of the game aren't as prescriptive as we might see in sort of our domestic zoning and building codes in many cases. But then once you have that robust engagement at the neighborhood level, that allows developers with some certainty to move forward underneath that plan. And they're really, as long as you're conforming with what's in that plan, you can move forward, you can invest, you can not get derailed by sometimes years of community engagement. We have we have 3 projects that are either under construction or about to be under construction. And all 3 of them took at least 7 years to get from initial concept and site control to groundbreaking. The longest one is a decade. And none of these projects have more than 17 units. One of these projects is 1 unit. So that is not a sustainable model for getting affordable housing. So if we have plans, and I think to the credit of Arlington County, the Columbia Pike Form-Based Code is an example of that. I think there are ways that we could streamline it further. It's not perfect, but in many ways, that has enabled a lot of growth and a lot of infill affordable housing and affordable housing preservation along the Columbia Pike corridor. So that's a local example where we can tie that to where we've seen that premise, where we do robust engagement at the neighborhood plan level about our objectives, and then we provide a more streamlined process for developers looking to build. But one of the things that I want to emphasize is that we can't plan for everything, and that in some cases that if we're trying to micromanage and prescribe everything, we're going to create dynamics where rules are working at cross purposes. So you've mentioned that we've seen a lot of upzonings that haven't resulted in meaningful increases in supply or improvements in affordability. Outside of like the specific policy details of that particular upzoning, are there any other sort of categories of policies or regulations that you found can inhibit the development just of supply in general or affordable housing in particular?
Yes, absolutely. And I think a big one that we don't talk about enough, at least in the circles that I run in, is the prescriptive nature of building codes and how, this was a statistic I heard and I could not believe it, so I had to look it up, but the lack of innovation in housing construction. So between 1970 and 2020, US construction productivity fell by an average of 1% per year, while manufacturing productivity increased 9-fold during that period. And many experts believe that the prescriptive way we create building codes is a big contributor to that, right? So instead of saying, hey, we want you to build this house, we want you to put these two pieces of wood together in any way that you can that leads to a good outcome, we say, okay, here's 3 ways you can do it. And you have to do it one of those 3 ways, right? That doesn't lead to innovation. And that leads to cost, right, and development. So I'm sure many of you also saw the Washington Post article showing that a LIHTC unit in DC costs between $700,000 and $1.3 million to develop right now. I mean, that's crazy, right? We need to figure out ways. Of course, a lot of that is land costs, right? But a lot of that is this innovation in construction, the cost that we are just building, in addition to all of these barriers and things that we're putting on, the amount of time it takes to get something passed. But I think we need to think about more innovative ways, and I know there are so many innovators in the room today, more innovative ways to get more manufactured housing, more modular, more panelized construction, anything we can do to start chipping away at these requirements that impede productivity, or start moving towards performance-based codes, right? So some examples of some other states that are doing really cool work here. Colorado, Utah, and Virginia are now recognizing national standards for modular and panelized construction. That's great. Oregon and California legalized mid and high-rise mass timber buildings for up to 18 stories. Those finish apparently 15 to 25% faster than other types of buildings. Several cities and states, including Seattle, the state of Washington, and Tennessee, allow 6-story apartment buildings with a single staircase. I know that's been a hot topic, and I think it's being discussed in Virginia. And Washington allows compliance based on energy performance rather than on rigid standards. So those are just some examples of places that are kind of trying to move towards this more like, let's encourage innovation in construction and look more at outcomes rather than very, very prescriptive rules. And one other way that I think states can start to think about encouraging these kinds of cost savings and innovation as well is in their LIHTC qualified allocation plans. So really looking at those and thinking about what rules do we have in here that increase costs that maybe we don't need, or what, and then what can we adjust to incentivize lower costs and innovation, right? Can we start incentivizing some modular multifamily housing? Can we start using that to move the needle forward on those kinds of innovations?
Yeah, there's an interesting, for those who want to do some additional homework, the UCLA Housing Voice podcast has been highlighting a lot of these innovations, which we're calling them innovations because it's the way we do things in the United States, but in some cases, these are things that have been done for decades and sometimes centuries in other countries, in other developed countries, around things like, as you mentioned single-stair reform, and other examples like simple things like when does the residential building code apply versus when does the commercial building code apply. So if you go to a triplex in many scenarios, you're going from the residential building code, which is how most single-family homes and duplexes are built, to a commercial building code. And when we look at some of the most loved neighborhoods in our communities, a lot of these were built prior to the advent of a lot of these modern building codes, and you couldn't build them today if something happened to them and they had to be rebuilt, and they're still standing. If you think about it, there's a lot of buildings that are, just look at parts of Alexandria as one of our oldest core communities that were built over a century ago. And those units are still standing. They're still predominantly safe if you have kept up with them. And they're not built to the current building codes. So we have to be thinking, and that doesn't mean we just ignore health and safety. I don't think anyone's saying that. Let's instead of saying, well, here's how the fire code applies and you can't deviate that from at all, why don't we create some flexibility where we can bring the fire department in and fire marshals in and say, like, all right, how can we make this different way of doing things safe? Mm-hmm. Are there ways that we can innovate and talk about what our ideas might be to address legitimate concerns about health and safety without this rigid prescriptiveness around our building codes? So far, we've been operating under the assumption that everyone wants to act to address housing supply and affordability, and unfortunately, that's not always the case. And we're in a broad region with, and I think we're lucky to be in a region where most jurisdictions, at least nominally want to address the housing crisis, but that's not the case everywhere. So let's just say hypothetically there's someone that a jurisdiction that doesn't want to address housing supply at all. And the fact that we have to address this, as you mentioned, in terms of upzoning and housing supply, the broader the base at which you're doing this, the better the outcomes would be. Are there rules for state policies? Are there examples of state policies that have moved the needle in encouraging local production and changes in affordability policies?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is, for me, it's one of the things that's getting me through day to day of seeing all the exciting things that states are doing across the country, right? And I also like to harken back to, think about, from from crisis, you can find a lot of opportunity, right? And I think a lot about during COVID with ARPA funds, like the amazing things that cities did with those funds. Cash transfers, before COVID, I was doing research on cash transfers and I wasn't allowed to use that word because they were so afraid that the project would be shut down because people were so afraid of it. Now it's a common thing that many cities have in place because of ARPA funds. So thinking about how from crisis you can really find opportunity. And we're seeing that across the nation as we, face this housing crisis. We're seeing states like Texas limited the minimum lot size for new single-family subdivisions. California loosened notorious CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act rules, which were frequently used by non-environmental groups to stall housing developments. And many states have allowed for plexes in single-family zones. And I think one thing that we've been thinking a lot about lately, and I've been learning about, is state housing target setting programs, which I know can be sometimes scary to localities, particularly those who feel like maybe we've already done our share, right? And why are you going to force me to do more? But I think they're not as scary as they sound. And how these programs work, and I know the DC region has their own regional housing targets as well, which is great. But in a lot of states, there are decades-long state housing target programs that can vary widely, right? So Massachusetts' 40B program requires that all localities have 10% of their housing units be affordable within the state. New Jersey sets city-specific, locality-specific targets for each place. Oregon has a new state housing target program where they're setting locality-specific targets. And Virginia, there was a bill introduced but not passed, that would have required a 1.5% increase in supply for all localities per year. Or you could fulfill, I think it was like 3 of 10 reforms that included things like reducing parking requirements and all the things we've been talking about that can help supply. But really how these work, right, usually is if you don't reach those goals, all it is there's a builder's remedy saying that if somebody wants to build, say in Massachusetts, a building that is affordable or that meets their mixed income requirements, then that builder just gets a comprehensive streamlined permit and gets to build as long as it's kind of like a buy right thing, right? Which is kind of, what we should be striving towards anyway, I think. I think the more we can think about, can a state housing target program work in Virginia? Can it work in some of the other states around us? And if so, let's get involved in thinking about what that might look like to be most effective to ensure that everyone is regionally sharing in this housing production. It can be focused on affordable housing, it can be focused on total supply, it can be a combination of the two. There's lots of different ways of doing that. So I think that's something that'd be great to continue thinking about in this region.
And some of that target setting really relies on good data and good research. And so can you talk a little bit about the work that Urban's doing to spread to catalog and disseminate data around housing production, housing rents, things like that could help better help policymakers inform these decisions?
Sure, absolutely. I promised myself I wouldn't talk too much about data because people's eyes tend to glaze over.
Just we can spare 30 seconds.
But I will say, absolutely how those numbers are defined mattered a lot, right? So for housing targets, you want to make sure you're not setting them just based on past production because localities that have been historically exclusive haven't had high past production. But I'll also note that just writ large, it's crazy how little data we have on current rents anywhere, right? Most localities depend on 5 to 7 year old census data, especially if you're looking at neighborhood level rents, or maybe proprietary data, which is biased upwards towards big multifamily properties, professionally managed properties. And so we at Urban are happy to have a National Science Foundation grant to create a real-time database of neighborhood level rents. It won't be out for 3 years, so I should probably not get people too psyched yet. But we are running a pilot for DC is one of our 3 pilot regions, the DC region. And so we will have pilot data out soon that we would love for you all to look at and say whether it looks right or not. But we'll be collecting data from rental listing websites and turning it into neighborhood level indices of rents that hopefully will be helpful for folks in this room, for local leaders, community leaders, to start to not just track and monitor how various policies and programs are impacting rents, but to be able to target policies and programs to areas where there are, either rapidly increasing rents or areas, in need for various reasons. So we're working on that, but also love to always hear more about what data needs are out there. That would be helpful.
So, there's one more topic I want to bring up before we transition to Q&A, but I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of local examples. We've mentioned a few here and there, but we're not certainly being exhaustive. So if in your jurisdiction you're doing something innovative and that we haven't mentioned it, please don't take offense. Doesn't mean we're not aware of it or you're not doing good work, but that's the focus of the next panel. So where we're lifting up local examples. So we wanted to highlight a lot of the national examples that we don't have as direct access to. So as a employee of Habitat for Humanity, I'd be remiss if I didn't take the prerogative to raise the issue of affordable home ownership. And though there's been some mixed news about the softening in the housing market lately, we're still experiencing the difficult combination of elevated mortgage rates and high prices. And if you follow Dr. Lisa Sturdivant's work at Bright MLS, even if there is some softening, we continue to have some softening due to job cuts at the federal level and everything like that. Our market was so out of balance that we're not going to be affordable anytime soon. So as far as I'm concerned, we should be still thinking about affordable home ownership, that we're not going to have automatically our problem go away anytime soon. So have you come across in that space, and I'm particularly interested in learning from your perspective on this so I can take it into my day-to-day work, have you come across any interesting findings related to home ownership programs or subsidies in your research?
Yes, absolutely. And I will mention one local one, but I'm biased because I'm on their board. But Housing Alexandria does have a shared equity homeownership program, which is starting up. Very exciting. But another policy program that I've been really following closely and excited to see that are popping up around the nation are first generation home buyer programs, home ownership supports. So I was kind of disheartened early in my career to be evaluating a down payment assistance program where it appeared that a lot of the people who were receiving the assistance were folks who had intergenerational wealth from their parents, were gonna make a lot of money in their career, but just were at the kind of beginning of their career, right? And so started always looking for how can we really target these supports to kind of get at some of those intergenerational wealth inequities that we see in that are related to racial inequities in home ownership. And recently we've been seeing a lot of programs pop up that are defining and targeting homeownership supports to first generation home buyers, meaning that their parents did not own a home, so they did not have the wealth to pass down for the down payment of their home. And so some examples of this include Minnesota's first gen home buyer down payment assistance. It's completed now. It was they created this using ARPA funds, but that was $35,000, up to $35,000 for first-gen buyers, forgivable after 5 years. It was created as a loan forgivable after 5 years. Mass Dreams also used ARPA funds to provide grants up to $50,000 for first-generational home buyers in certain communities. And Fannie Mae's pilot products are now testing how lenders can incorporate first-gen status into underwriting. So we're seeing a lot of movement there, and I think that's a really promising opportunity that if anyone can kind of build that into whatever programs we already have going, right? Take that next step to not just be first-time homeownership supports, but first-gen. I think we can really create that positive upward cycle of reducing some of those racial inequities and wealth gaps that we see.
And I think that's a great point. Virginia Housing has some programs with their interest rate buy downs that also apply to first generation homeowners, and particularly for those of us that are still committed to addressing the historic inequities in the housing market, predominantly on the basis of race and ethnicity. Despite the current headwinds, this is a way that we can do that by most directly addressing the core issue we were looking to remedy, that some people were locked out of home ownership entirely based on government policy. And it's a facially race-neutral way to address that policy or address that core need without potentially getting sued into oblivion, which is a risk that we have to at least think about nowadays. But it doesn't mean that we abandon the work. It means that we work to address the core issue in the best way that we can, which is the theme of this event. So I know that hopefully there's lots of questions, and I know we didn't address a lot of topics. So we'll see what we get to during the Q&A.
Let's give them a round of applause. I think we could have you for another hour and then not even be able to get through all of our questions, but really, really grateful for you being here and a great conversation. So we do have a lot of questions, so thank you, audience. I'm glad we were able to fix the code, and this will be open for our next panel as well, so please make sure that you are looking at that. But one question I got, that was a question of clarification. Can you identify when you talk about DC area, when you refer to data research being done, what are you talking, what does that
Oh,
mean?
sorry, yeah.
No,
I mean,
just thought that
probably
was a
in
good
different
question.
cases, I meant different things.
No.
I meant the DMV, DC, like I mean, sometimes, this is where I'm gonna get too nerdy. Sometimes we mean like a commuting zone, but oftentimes we mean the metropolitan region as defined by the census. It's usually how I'm defining it.
Great, thank you. Okay, first question. Private equity has a strong hold on the housing industry and relying on predatory business practices that significantly impact affordability. Do you know what other jurisdictions are doing to combat this?
That's such a big one. I don't know if you want to take this. This is something that is on my list of things I want to learn more about because I think financialization of housing, also just how this all relates to our massive wealth inequities writ large and how that is also contributing to our housing crisis. I mean, there are things that places are doing to, try to keep flippers out of the market, putting extra taxes on vacant properties. There are ways that people are trying to address this kind of issue of financialization and commodification of housing, but I'm definitely not an expert on it, so I'm not gonna speak more, but yeah.
So I wouldn't call myself an expert on this, but it is something that, the data, it's important to acknowledge what we don't know. And maybe we didn't touch on that enough during the first part of the chat, but this is an area where the data is really mixed. I mean, the private equity share of the housing market is still pretty small, enough to make differences on the margins, and in some neighborhoods, particularly at the neighborhood level, it can have a really big impact. So it's a nuanced conversation. Private equity is also a tool that can be used for good, bad, and neutral. So I know that some of our core partners, like Enterprise, LISC, they put together equity funds. That's substantially private equity, with whose sole and only focus is preserving or expanding affordable housing. So when we talk about private equity, it's really important to talk about what we need to address. And what we're talking about really is A, competition, and B, sort of abuses. I think the competition one is the harder piece to address that I personally don't have great answers to in terms of like how do we give the first-time homeowner a leg up, or the first-generation homeowner a leg up in that competition for the starter home. That's a difficult piece to address and that we're still thinking about. But in terms of abuses, and we're talking about sort of predatory acquisition, if we're talking about property management and tenants' rights, we can make it harder for people that would be inclined to have abusive practices to operate. Make it more costly for people that aren't looking to invest to upgrade the housing stock, whether they're mission-driven or they're just a responsible market rate private equity fund. Those do exist out there. Give those actors a leg up over those that are looking to just buy, strip, and flip. And so you can do that with housing quality standards and inspections, tenant protection rights around eviction, again, building code, housing quality, things like that. So, and then, if you look at, it's become a little bit of a cliche for people to talk about on the pro-supply side, but I forget which big private equity firms investor filings, they said they like to operate in the areas that have the most constrained supply. So because it artificially drives up the property values, it makes it an equitable investment. If there's plenty of supply, they don't have as much of a hold on the market, and therefore, and this is particularly in the context of single-family rentals, private equity and single-family rentals, not as much acquiring multifamily properties. But if you are having an efficient market where supply can rise to meet demand, then those investment opportunities are going to be less beneficial to them.
Great, thank you. Another interesting question given about what we've been dealing with, I think, this last year, especially here in Northern Virginia. Are there any innovations relating to reducing the ability of anti-development neighbors to use lawsuits to prevent more housing options?
You know, I'm not a lawyer, so that's probably we've seen these rises in lawsuits come and go. I know this was an issue in D.C. A few years back, well, more than a few years back, where their planned unit development, which is or a policy, which is how you got a lot of your rezoning, kind of rezoning process for individual projects, had a lot of kind of like a laundry list of objectives that they wanted to accomplish. Some of them mutually exclusive. And so that created an opening when a couple judges came in, new judges came in, saw that ordinance, started interpreting that as if you're not checking if you have some of these contradictory things in here, that you're not checking all the boxes and some are working at cross purposes, led to a lot of lawsuits and stalled development in the District of Columbia. The district reacted and updated their comprehensive plan. As far as I'm aware, that issue, while it's not easy to develop in the District of Columbia from a community engagement perspective, that specific issue that was holding things up has gone away. So I think it is going to be largely case by case. My thinking of this is the more prescriptive you are in all of your policies and dictating every last inch of the development, the more opportunities you give someone to sue you, that you're not meeting those that you're not meeting those objectives. So I think in some ways the answer is not to it's to kind of let go of the reins a little bit and provide more opportunities for success, so to speak, from a development perspective, and fewer things that people who are frivolously pursuing these things through the courts, fewer things for them to hang their hats on. Which isn't to say, there are scenarios where a developer, if they're completely blatantly ignoring, we've seen this, again, examples that we've seen in the district, particularly in historically African-American neighborhoods where there's some predatory practices on the development side where people just aren't abiding by stormwater regulations, and because there's not as much capacity to catch every actor, we don't want to take away the right of the neighbors there to take action to protect their own properties. So it's always a balancing act. So I think when we're making regulations, when we're making policy, let's focus on the things that truly matter, the big picture core objectives, and maybe not worry as much about the type of siding we're putting on the side of the house.
Yeah, and definitely not a lawyer, so I'm going to kind of stay away from it's kind of the way our nation is structured that we have a very litigious society, right? But I will say just on the broader point that we touched on earlier related to who, outside of the lawsuit, there's a lot of other ways, right, that community members engage and oppose housing. And there are a lot of pretty simple, specific ways that can start to address that and rebalance that. One is ensuring that there aren't homeownership requirements on your zoning board for your zoning board members, offering stipends and childcare for zoning board members and for community members that are engaging in specific processes. And, just collecting data on who's engaging and then reweighting those, if you're doing a survey, collecting data on homeownership status, income, and even if you can just get zip code. Unfortunately, that tells us a lot about someone's likely income, and reweighting responses to be representative of the community. I think that can help people really see what the overall opinion is rather than just the kind of few loud voices.
One more actual thing, if I can. This is not directly answering that question, but it's a way that we can go about community engagement productively. I don't want to give the impression that that we should steamroll neighborhoods. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying we need to have the right level of community engagement where legitimate needs are met, but aesthetic preferences and, in some cases, prejudices don't win the day necessarily. So there's some things that, and maybe where you strike that balance might be a little bit more to one side or the other side of the ledger that I would personally like. But the important part is that you're having that conversation and you're trying to move the needle in the right direction. So one example we've seen there is pattern books. So it's not saying that you have to develop these pre-approved plans in order to build, but it's saying there's jurisdictions that have engage with the community to develop a pattern book. And this is predominantly in low and mid density zones, so single family neighborhoods, duplexes, triplexes, missing middle type stuff, where they engage with the community and say, okay, what type of building forms do you like? What type of buildings would you welcome into your neighborhood, getting perspectives on that, and then saying, okay, we're going to develop plans from these, and these are pre-approved plans. You do these things, we've engaged with the community, we see that the community at large likes these, you do these things, you get approved. Again, that doesn't mean you can't develop other things on site, but it creates a way for developers to get some certainty and say, like, okay, this is what the community wants. The community was engaged on this. I'm going to build what the community asked for that also meets my needs as a developer, and I'm not going to have to spend 3 or 4 years trying to get approvals to do so.
That's great. Thank you. This ties slightly into that. So how can we encourage and finance smaller square footage units, including shared micro units in the region? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, there's been some great innovations that I've seen in terms of rethinking building codes again, to allow for kind of more like almost dorm style living, right? From, and particularly being able to convert office space into kind of more shared living for younger folks. I mean, again, I think getting back to this, like, how can we think about building codes and think about, we talked about accessory dwelling units, allowing more than one per property and allowing those to be subdivided and condoized. That will get us to smaller, we have a lack of starter homes, right, for most people, so those smaller properties. And then things like we saw Texas doing with, ensuring that lot size minimums aren't too large or making those smaller for new homes and new subdivisions. There's a lot that can be done there, I think.
Capital will flow to a reliable opportunity. So I'm not an expert in sort of micro units, shared housing. I'm more than vaguely familiar with it. I've studied it a little bit, but we haven't built that at Habitat. There's a huge shortage of those 3 family-size starter homes, whether it's on the homeownership side and then family-size rentals. It's a huge gap. So we're operating on the opposite end of the spectrum there, but to the extent that people can't find, those micro units, those types of units, and then they're renting out a 4-bedroom single-family home and splitting it with their 4 friends, that takes a family-sized unit off the market. So I think that it all connects together. It's an ecosystem, and you take away one part of the ecosystem, then things start getting out of whack. So, but I think that what we've seen with California and ADUs is when California adopted the more streamlined ADU program, that allowed for an ecosystem of developers and capitals to come in and begin financing specific projects. And capital flowed to those types of ADU projects, particularly after the condoization law was passed, because they knew that across a big enough jurisdiction, there were going to be enough developers building this product that they could finance it at a reasonable level of scale. If every single one of these projects is bespoke and has 3 years of uncertainty about or more, and in terms of entitlements, then you're not going to really get capital to come to support those projects. But I think that office to residential conversion actually could be, because of the unique natures of the floor plates, could be a big opportunity in that space. And there is some we've started to see capital flowing to that area. That's an area where Fairfax County has been a leader in terms of allowing office to residential conversions. I live in Arlington County, but at the corner that's right by Fairfax, and in a reasonable sized walk, I can probably walk to, and between the city of Alexandria and Fairfax County, probably over 1,000 units of office to residential converted housing. So if you allow developers to do it at scale, the capital will come.
Great, thank you. We're getting so many outstanding questions. I think some of them apply to our second panel that's going to focus here on our region. So I'm just going to ask one more final question, and then I'm going to encourage you to find Mike and Tina at the reception and ask your question of them if we didn't get to it, because there's a lot to cover here. So would love to get your feeling about the need for extremely low-income households, housing for extremely low-income households, and how advocates sometimes push back on development that's 100% committed affordable. And can you talk about how maybe some of the land use reforms interact with solutions for that extremely low-income population?
Yes, absolutely. And this gets back to the yes and. Yes, we need deeply affordable housing for people right now. And a lot of the big structural fixes we're talking about aren't going to create that ever, really, and especially not right now, right? So we need the yes and. And like I mentioned, sometimes there's a graph I made, I should have brought it to put up, where it's like, everyone wants a silver bullet for everything, right? But really, there's a spectrum of affordability that we need. We need housing units across that spectrum and over time, because there's some policies that actually create short-term reductions in supply at certain incomes, and then maybe have long-term impacts. But we need housing right now for people who need it. And this also relates to the one topic we didn't get to talk about, which I think we have to touch on, is homelessness, because we're seeing a lot of things happening in the homelessness sector that, let's say, go against best practices and evidence. And so, I mean, I think thinking about that entire spectrum, they're all related, right? If we don't create supply at any level, we're not going to have enough housing overall, right? And we're going to be fighting, trying to push a boulder up a hill forever, right? But we need the whole spectrum of housing. We need for people experiencing chronic homelessness, we need permanent supportive housing that creates wraparound services and extremely affordable housing, right? And while that sounds really expensive and scares people, there's randomized research showing that saves costs down the line in terms of jail night stays, in terms of healthcare costs. My colleagues did a study in Denver showing that people randomized to receive permanent supportive housing had 38 fewer days in jail and 4 fewer visits to detox facilities. That's a lot of cost savings, right? So if we can find ways to front pay those cost savings you're going to get down the line up now and help people get into permanent supportive housing, they can move up the line. But we have to think of housing and housing policy as addressing that entire spectrum of need, both now and into the future. Because if we only address, it kind of goes both ways, right? If we only address the current need right now by maybe creating policies that actually make developing housing harder, without also changing other rules that make it easier in an equivalent way, then we're just going to be making the problem bigger and bigger and bigger as we go, right? So we need to address both now and the future at all affordability levels. That's a big job, but I think
usually types of congregate housing, putting aside permanent supportive housing, which is sort of the gold standard, but other forms of congregate housing, temporary housing. If you actually read most of our zoning codes, there's actually additional steps that you have to take to build that in a neighborhood. It's the path of most resistance, not the path of least resistance from a regulatory perspective. And then you layer on the not in my backyard element of that. So we're not even with neutral for those types of housing solutions. We're starting from behind. So no policy, you don't get a policy that's generally applicable that makes development harder, that affordable housing, supportive housing, whatever AMI level you're trying to target will have an easier time navigating. Everything that's put in the way of development that is generally applicable makes affordable housing harder, period. Unless it's a specific incentive to streamline affordable housing. That's a different story, which sounds a little bit self-serving from me, but so be it. And I think that one of the reasons that we're seeing this retrenchment from best practices around homelessness is because too many people have failed to take the problem seriously. And it's not that permanent supportive housing or any of those best practices failed. It's that we did not rise in terms of funding and units to the size of the challenge, that it made it look like some of those solutions were failing because they weren't able to reach enough people. And therefore, it created an opening for people to say, PSH doesn't work. And because and it's not just the funding of the units themselves, it's the funding of the services that go along with permanent supportive housing. Mm-hmm. So we didn't, as a collective and collective entity, we didn't across the nation. This is not blaming any one person or jurisdiction or entity. We didn't rise to meet the moment as homelessness increased, especially post-COVID, and that unfortunately, in public perception, discredited a lot of these solutions that we know work. And we can say that that's just perception; it's not reality. Well, perception matters for what actually gets implemented and what comes next. So I think this should be sobering that we can't just look at real solutions and say, well, we're making some progress. We're doing a little bit here, a little bit there. If it's a solution that affects people's daily lives, we need to address it now.
Yeah, and just one, I have to put in a plug for one of my colleagues had the best analogy for that. She said if you had 50 people going into a allergic shock in a hospital and you only had 10 EpiPens, would you say that those EpiPens didn't work? No, you would say you didn't have enough EpiPens for everyone that needed one, right? And that's the same thing with housing. We need more EpiPens, we need more housing, and I know y'all are doing the great work to make those solutions happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that analogy, and thank you all. We do hope you'll both be able to stay for the reception, and we can kind of quiz you some more. We're just going to take a pause, not a break. We're going to take a pause. So I want to welcome those of you who are in the back. If you want to come up toward the front, we do have open seats. You do not need to stand. We have another, hour and to go. So I don't want you standing the whole time. So please make yourself comfortable. If our second panel wants to come up to the stage, we can kind of switch everybody out and we'll do some introductions. For those of you who came in a little bit late, there is yourself to something to drink and restrooms behind the registration desk. We are going to get started in 2 minutes, though, so thank you. It's going to be hard to calm them back down, but... All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I promise plenty of networking time for you after this, so thank you so much for taking your seats. For those who are in the back and want a seat, please come forward. We're going to be here for another hour, so make yourself comfortable. Grab a seat. Okay. All right, thank you everyone so much. Again, welcome, if you weren't here originally, to NVAHA's 20th anniversary Educate and Celebrate event. Shh, I know, this whispering. All right, I feel like I should do 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. Okay. Okay. All right, thanks everybody. We're gonna go ahead and get started. I know you will have plenty of time to network after this. We're thrilled to have you. Please move up if you want seats. We have some open seats near the front. Again, my name is Jill Norcross. I am the Executive Director of NVAHA, and so happy to see you all here, and I know you're so happy to see each other. But we want to move to the second panel. And introducing the second panel for us today is one of our wonderful partners, Josh Faverka, who's Vice President of Government Affairs at NVAR, who is the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors. Josh, so happy to have you. Thank you for your partnership always, and thank you for your support.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill, and good evening, everyone. As Jill said, Josh Faverka, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors. On behalf of NVAR and our 13,000 members, it's a privilege to join you tonight at the Leckey Forum and to celebrate NVAHA's 20 years of advocacy and impact in our community. At NVAR, we're proud to serve as the voice of real estate in Northern Virginia. Last year alone, our members facilitated more than 16,000 transactions representing nearly $14 billion in sales. But behind those numbers are families and first-time buyers, renters, and they all depend on a housing market that is accessible and attainable and sustainable. And that's why we're here tonight, because increasing the housing supply and advancing policies that expand opportunity are at the very heart of NVAR's mission, and we share that with NVAHA. So we're honored to stand with NVAHA as a sponsor of this event and a supporter of your tireless advocacy. You know, your work, whether it's elevating new strategies, championing innovative policies, building these strong partnerships that are really moving the ball forward, ensure that more of our neighbors can find a place to call home here in Northern Virginia. And, you know, the timing of this conversation could not be more important. I think, you know, never has housing policy been at the center of the conversation of every level of government like it is today. And the reason for that is simple, and that is that it costs too much to rent or buy a home. I think as Mike on the previous panel had mentioned, despite what you may be reading on the national housing market, there is no downward trend in the prices, and the bottom's not falling out of the real estate market here in Northern Virginia. In fact, in August, our statistics show that the overall sales volume in Northern Virginia rose slightly, while the dollar volume climbed by nearly 6% year over year. The median home price continued to move upward. We're now over $750,000 for our median price. Now our inventory has grown, and that is a good thing. Our active listings are up over 36% from this time last year. That's giving buyers more options and more time to make decisions. Maybe they don't have to, you know, forego those inspections, and they're not, you know, biting at the first thing. Our days on market are up a little bit. You know, we had an 18-day average a year ago. Today it's 26-day average for days on market. But that's by no means a sluggish market. The national average is 47 days. So we're still a high demand area, and our home prices and our home values are remaining high. And this underscores that need for long-term solutions to expand attainable housing across our region. So tonight, as we celebrate our leaders and our innovators in this space, let's recommit ourselves to the work ahead, bringing together our advocates, our policymakers. I know I've seen several of our elected officials here, and really just ensure that Northern Virginia remains to be a place where people at every stage of life can live and thrive. So on behalf of NVAHA, thank you to NVAHA for your leadership, and congratulations on 20 years of advancing the cause of affordable housing in our region. And it's my privilege now to transition into the next portion of the evening's program. We just heard our national perspectives on affordable housing solutions and housing supply, and now we're going to turn a little closer to home. Our regional panel is going to spotlight some of the policies and programs that are creating and preserving housing here in Northern Virginia, and kind of how we can build on that progress, I think. So tonight we're joined by Ken Silverman, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Housing Opportunities Commission. We have Tom Fleetwood, who's the Director of Fairfax County's Department of Housing and Community Development. We have Joseph Williams, the Senior Program Director with the Enterprise Faith-Based Initiative. And finally, please join me in welcoming our moderator, Margaret Barthel, Northern Virginia reporter with WAMU, and joining us with the rest of our exceptional panel. So thank you.
All right. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. Well, thank you, Josh, and to NVAHA as well for having all of us. I think we're all very excited to have this conversation, and I will say that I, for one, am a little bit intimidated by the amount of expertise that is seated on the stage next to me. So, yeah, this is our group of regional practitioners here to highlight, how they are working on specific solutions to meet our region's housing challenges. And I'd like to start with asking each of them to lay the foundation, so to speak. No, tough crowd. So, kind of give each of you a couple of minutes to talk through what is it that you're doing, the basic origin story, and, kind of where you are in the process of making, bringing this thing into reality. So let's start with you, Ken.
Thank you, Margaret. Hi, everyone. Really amazing to be here in Virginia. Again, my name is Ken Silverman. I work at the Housing Opportunities Commission across the river in Montgomery County. We're the county's public housing authority, first and foremost, and then we're also a housing finance agency, and we kind of are now talking about ourselves as a public developer. I think the thing that I've sort of been asked here to talk about today is our Housing Production Fund, which we created in 2021. It's a partnership with our Montgomery County government. It's a $100 million revolving fund that we use to build new mixed income housing. It's generally 70% market rate, 30% affordable. And we're able to build these properties without needing any additional federal subsidies. So without cannibalizing our existing resources to do LIHTC or voucher projects. I think, to give a little bit of an origin story, I actually kind of take comfort in that HOC came out of a period in the early 70s when the federal government was backing away from affordable housing, and in particular, sort of public housing. And there was a group of folks, I think maybe not too different from the types of folks that are in this room in Montgomery County, led by actually a Republican council member named Elizabeth Scull, who wanted to find a way for the county to step into the breach and provide that support. And one of the things that came out of that effort at that time was our inclusionary zoning policy, which was the first in the country. But another thing that came out of it, and maybe sort of took a little longer to bloom, was the reconstitution of the Housing Authority of Montgomery County into the Housing Opportunities Commission as an independent entity with this broader set of authorities that basically allows us to finance our own projects and a mandate to do mixed income projects and steer away from just doing the public housing model that we had been doing through the 60s up until that point. It took us a while to figure it out. We've tried a bunch of different approaches over the years. In 1989, we built our first sort of mixed income publicly owned large multifamily property that had no federal subsidy or support. It's called Timberlawn Manor. It's still operating and still quite a beautiful property. We worked through ways to try to include market development together with LIHTC development, and we built a number of large developments that way. But it's really hard, and anybody who's tried to do a combined market LIHTC project, I think can share that it's a really, really, really hard, slow, difficult process. And then in 2019, we built what I call kind of our proto HPF project, which is called the Lindley. It's in Chevy Chase, and that was again built with actually a sort of mission-ish private equity contribution, and then a senior mortgage, but no LIHTC, no vouchers, and was a huge success. But because of this private equity component, despite its success, HOC and the community, we weren't able to capture all the value that was created in that property. But we were really excited about our ability to do this, in addition to our full pipeline of affordable projects. And so out of that experience was born the idea to create this revolving fund that allows us to basically replace that private equity with public finance that where we own the property, we have a senior loan. We work with private developers to build the properties. We have completed our first property under this model in 2023. It's called the Laureate at the Shady Grove Metro at the end of the Red Line. It's about 300 units. And then we are under construction with our second, which is about 500 units. It's called Hillendale Gateway. It's on the eastern edge of Montgomery County. As you're coming around the Beltway from Prince George's towards Montgomery County, you can see two cement high-rise structures. They're pretty close to topping out now. And in that project, we were able to layer in LIHTC to get a much deeper and broader affordable structure. And we're hoping to be able to overall complete close to 3,000 new units, again, averaging 30% affordable by the end of this decade. Really enthusiastic about seeing if we can still get that done.
Let me ask you the critical question, though, which is, have you revolved the money back into the fund? And are there any kind of points of friction that you might anticipate in that process?
Yeah, that's, a really important question. So the idea of the fund is that it's a 5-year loan that finances the construction phase. Then once the project is built and leased up and stabilized, we do a permanent refinancing, and that money goes back into the housing production fund and is available for another project. As I said, the Laureate was completed in 2023. We're now coming up on our 5-year anniversary. We have not yet done that revolving, working through that. We'll admit the interest rate and cost environment today is a little different than it was in 2021 when we designed this, but we are confident we're going to be able to make that model work. And I think the idea is that it does work in any environment. We have not yet quite crossed that threshold, so we're really excited.
So stay tuned. Yeah. Joe, let's hear from you next.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope I don't have to use my preacher voice because this mic is not giving me what I need. So I'm grateful for being here today. So I like to say that Enterprise Community Partners was founded out of a faith encounter. So the late Jim Rouse, who you all know as a real estate developer, did Columbia, the Baltimore Harbor, other places, cut his teeth in development, was attending the Church of the Savior, and 3 women came to him and said, they're going to sell our building, and we need to keep it affordable, and we need your help. And like any good developer, he ran the numbers on the back of a napkin performer and said, it doesn't pencil out, it won't work. So about a month later, they came to him and they said, we just put down a non-refundable deposit on our building. What are you going to do? And Rouse had an epiphany. What if we could put the tenets of real estate development with faith and create an opportunity where we can have the preservation and production of affordable housing? So thus was born the Enterprise Foundation, which is now Enterprise Community Partners. We're in 11 different markets across this country. We also have what we call an owner-operator, Enterprise Community Development, that operates owns more than like 13,000 units of housing. We have a product line that's the CDFI, New Market Tax Credits, LIHTC, in addition to a loan fund that helps on the nonprofit side, and then we have a piece that helps also on the private side. In addition to that, where we sit, me and my other colleagues in the solutions arm, our work around making the mission of enterprise work unfolds through our advocacy and unfolds through the work through our market offices, and then the piece that I have the privilege of leading that is now about 20 years old. We'll be celebrating 20 years next year. Our faith-based development initiative, which we call in-house FBDI. FBDI has been working with houses of worship for over 20 years. In this region alone, we've brought on over 1,700 units, but we've now expanded it into a national program within Enterprise, where we're in 6 different cities, 11 different jurisdictions. In this market alone, we're working with 60-plus churches in a cohort model that we're working with in Prince George's County, the District of Columbia, Montgomery County, and Baltimore City. Yes, we count Baltimore City as a part of the work that we do. We're in conversations now as we look at the expansion opportunity for our cohort model. Conversations now in the Hampton Roads area, the city of Richmond, Frederick County, and just had a conversation the other day with Loudoun County. So our work and opportunity expands. So what does the cohort model look like? We like to tell our faith leaders that the development process is gangster. And if you don't become gangster, you get gangstered. And so our model teaches them how to, what we like to say, become comfortably conversant in the community development space. They're not experts, but they can now, after going through a 24 session curriculum, that's 5 different modules, that they now can have that conversation with a developer and understand what the language is. In addition to that, we raise funds for what we call early pre-development opportunities, whether it is a market analysis feasibility study to help them to put together a development concept plan that will then help them to get some guidance from a development consultant / owner's rep that would then give them the opportunity to put a RFP, RFQ on the street for a development partner. 9 times out of 10, the houses of worship that are in our ecosystem are going to stay in the deal. They're going to make sure that they are a part of the deal because their mission is critical to the works being done. And then in addition to that, so I mentioned that we have the training and that we have the consultants and we give them the funding. What we also do is that we make sure that they have what we call the enterprise connection in terms of the resources that we have. I do what I call shepherding TA, where I help them to also be able to connect what needs to happen internally, whether it's denominationally or in the congregation, so they can kind of move along. And anybody that's worked with a house of worship know this. Houses of worship work on the clock of eternity. Developers work on the clock of immediacy. How do you slow one down and speed the other up? And that's the work that we do. And one of the elements that we've added through our fundraising effort this year is that we added clergy coaches. These clergy coaches are individuals who have done projects, who now help them to navigate, because I will tell you that it is challenging in doing a development project and having to maintain your congregation, but having to navigate that you're effective. And one more thing I'll add is this. We teach in our training that if your first foray into being a good community partner is development, you're making a mistake. because you have to already be a good community partner. And most houses of worship are. We call them solution partners. They're there whether it's a food desert, whether there's clothing, whether there's medical, whatever it needs to be. 9 times out of 10 that they are. They're really, really good community partners. But that's where we get them moving forward in this expert. And one more thing I'll add. I know I said one more thing. Preachers have 3 points, y'all. They always have one more thing. But one more point I would add is that the step 0 portion of our training, of our 5-module training, is important, because that discernment piece is where you need to be before you can make a go or no-go decision.
Yeah, really interesting. And I'll ask you about your preacher voice in a minute. But first, let's hear from Tom about developing public land in Fairfax.
Great, thank you. I don't have a preacher voice. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Although I am happy to evangelize for the cause here. So in Fairfax County, just kind of taking a step back, Fairfax County is the largest jurisdiction by population in Virginia, home to about 1 in every 7 Virginians. And I am very proud of the work that we're doing in our jurisdiction under the leadership of our Board of Supervisors, which is making really unprecedented investments of both dollars in terms of an annual allocation in our budget. Right now, we're at a little over $40 million a year, as well as publicly owned land. And we really believe that, not only should affordable housing be in our backyard, it should be in our front yard. We've got a great example of a project that we're doing. Actually, it's funny, the connection to this event, it's being done in the front parking lot of the Fairfax County Government Center by Lincoln Avenue Capital, one of our sponsors here today, in partnership with Cornerstones, using a concept that was developed by Jerry Connolly, who's also being honored here today. That project will be using our front parking lot at the Government Center under a nominal fee ground lease to deliver 275 new affordable units and a child care center that will be operated by Cornerstones, literally in our front yard. And so the message that sends about the importance of affordable housing in Fairfax County cannot be understated. A little bit about our origin story and what we're working on today in terms of how a project like that fits in with our work today. Fairfax County is unique in Virginia and really across the country in that our housing authority is effectively an integrated part of our Department of Housing and Community Development. We act as the staff to our housing authority, and so that brings a lot of synergy with it. Some frustrations, I might add, but a lot of synergy that allows us to be very nimble in terms of responding to opportunities in the market. So our housing authority was founded via a voter referendum in 1965, which happens to be the same year that Fairfax County completed desegregation of its public schools. So the FCRHA has been really a partner all along with Fairfax County over these last 60 years now, as Virginia has emerged from the shadows of Jim Crow and Fairfax County has become the diverse and vibrant community it is. And that is thanks in part to the work of the Housing Authority and making our communities affordable to everyone. The FCRHA is a local housing finance agency. It is a provider of housing. We own and operate over 4,000 units of housing, ranging from a manufactured housing park to licensed assisted living and everything in between. We are a provider of housing choice vouchers under the Federal Housing Choice Voucher Program. We are one of the original 39 HUD moving to work agencies, so that allows us a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of how we utilize our federal housing programs, and I'll get to that in just a moment. As we have emerged here into the 21st century, our Board of Supervisors has really come to recognize the confluence between the moral imperative of affordable housing and the economic imperative. And they truly are investing in this as a priority in both. They have established for us a very ambitious goal of delivering 10,000 net new affordable units in our community by the year 2034. I'm pleased to say that as of right now, with units under construction and in our development pipeline, that we are about 40% of the way there. So we have a very long way to go, but we are making tremendous progress. I'll just, a couple of other examples in addition to the Lincoln Avenue project. In the Tysons Urban Center, we have almost 1,000 units under construction right now. And as a matter of fact, if you look at Tysons, the only two projects that have cranes in the air are affordable housing projects. One is with True Ground, the other is SCG Development. And I want to make sure I note to our partners in Amazon to just thank them for the incredible investment that they have made in those two projects, almost $100 million between the two of them to help bring those to fruition. And those two projects, they're both within close walking distance of Silver Line metro stations and will provide essential workers for the businesses in our urban core. We are very proud of how we braid together our publicly owned land and our local and federal financing to do public-private partnerships to deliver these units. We could not do all of this work without our private partners. And we are very lucky in Northern Virginia to have an outstanding core of for-profit and nonprofit affordable housing developers with whom we work every day to make these projects move forward. So again, we have a lot going on. We have a lot of work ahead of us. But with continued investment, continued creativity, continued support, and the incredible work of NVAHA, both in terms of the technical research they do and the advocacy work that they do, we have a very bright future ahead of us in spite of the many challenges we face. Thank you.
All right, so now we have sort of a basic sense of the 1,000,001 things that these three are doing. And so now I want to ask, what would it take for all of you to scale your work up, whether that's making it bigger in the jurisdiction or jurisdictions that you're currently working in, or expanding it into other jurisdictions, maybe, making some of these ideas a little bit contagious. So Ken, we can start with you.
Yeah, this has been, so before I joined HOC, I worked for 10 years at the Montgomery County Council doing housing policy, worked to help create the Housing Production Fund on that side, and then have had the unbelievable privilege to get to, now be part of kind of implementing it and, helping to hold the doors open as folks actually move into buildings. One of the really fun parts of this job has been getting to talk to folks all over the country that are looking at this model, and we now have a number of cities that have adopted some version of it. So Atlanta was the farthest out the gate, and they have a $40 million fund and a project under construction. The city of Chicago has just created a new entity and a $120 million fund. And there's a number of other places. Chattanooga, Tennessee has also kind of embraced this and started a little smaller with a $20 million fund. One of the things that we've definitely seen is that it looks a little different in every place. It's a local policy, a local effort, and so it's going to look, different for everywhere. Some of these places have chosen to create new entities to sort of manage these programs. Some of them have found ways to adapt, their existing agencies or entities. So, it's doing things like this and getting to, engage and spread, and especially in our region, obviously, building housing here helps us in Maryland. In order for us to scale up, we just need more money.
So,
if anybody has money, would really love to talk to you.
Great. And what about you, Joe?
So our model that we have is really a combination of a public-private opportunity, where we work with the municipality and tap into the goals that they have and asking them to support the cohort model with dollars that sometimes come out of the trust fund or other areas of funds they have, and then get a private philanthropy to come beside us to do it. Now, 2019, the Urban Institute did a study and talked about the number of houses of worship in this region alone in the DMV that has underutilized land. And one of the things that I always ask housing directors, if you have 1,000 houses of worship in your jurisdiction and 10% of them said they're ready to do affordable housing, are you ready to put up the money to support it, to make it happen? Because it will help to solve and reach the goals that they have. And the reason why it's important to use these houses of worship and to have that partnership is because once you educate them, they bring their mission to it, and they're in it to win it. And they're in it to stay in it, and the longevity piece in the continuum.
We'll talk a little bit more about that because you yourself are a pastor, and I think the connection between the mission and the the development goal is pretty important to your work. So draw that out for us.
So let me say that one of the things that these houses of worship do that we, in terms of us helping them get them ready, is that they end up developing their own community development corporations. And then their first development project, they're really in it to learn how to do it, because they have their eye on a second project while they're in the first, because they're visionaries and they're looking to move around within their sphere and their jurisdiction and where they are to make a difference. And so setting up a community development corporation that then can now become a part of end up being even a joint, not just a joint venture partner in the beginning, but then becoming a co-developer on the other opportunity, building up their balance sheet. Because what the houses of worship is going to do is they're going to raise money to not only support the project in terms of the opportunity to support the individuals, but they're going to look to raise money to make sure that the asset does not decline.
Tom, what about you? What are the scalability challenges with developing on public lands?
Availability and cost. And we're trying to be more and more creative about how we use public land, including infill for smaller scale home ownership projects, but also going out and being entrepreneurial about identifying opportunities for land banking. To be able to put ourselves in a position to have more opportunities to do those public-private partnerships in a broader variety of areas.
Right, so raising the ceiling, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you two are identifying money as a major limiting factor here. Are there other things, staff, community support, policy, legislation? I know we're talking about faith-based housing in Virginia, but it hasn't, General Assembly hasn't agreed to it yet. So, what are some of the other maybe hurdles that are not financial that you come across in your work?
Well, let me say this. We're fortunate at Enterprise, and many of you will know this name when I said I have a colleague by the name of Alyssa Bondi who works hard, tirelessly, working to get legislation and things in place. One of the things that the houses of worship need is an opportunity for a zoning variance that can be written into the code so that there are things that they can do by right as opposed to what they're just restricted to because it is a quote-unquote worship place. And having the opportunity to do this, like, for example, in the comprehensive plan in the district wrote in the code that there is an upzoning opportunity for a house of worship that they can apply for based on where it's sitting in terms of proximity of a development project. So that opportunities like that. The Montgomery County ZTA, which again was something that we worked with, Melissa worked on, as we worked with these houses of worship, and we got a project now that's sitting in Silver Spring that's going to be one of the first to benefit from that, with 123 units, some home ownership opportunity and the like that's going to come online. So that the legislation is critical from not just within the local jurisdiction, but even at the state level as well as at the federal level.
definitely attest to how amazing Melissa is. If you could clone her, that would be a step forward for policy, I think. I think one of the things that really surprised me, that I didn't necessarily see from the legislative side that I see now I'm getting closer to, actually developing properties is how bifurcated the industry is between a market rate housing and affordable housing. And that, there's whole separate lawyers, accountants, developers, and the affordable side is way harder because you have to do everything that the market folks do, zoning, permitting, building code, all of those restrictions and difficulties. And then you have to do the compliance and the, community engagement and raise money from all of these sources. So yeah, I don't have a solution to that, but
Well, I have a question, so let me jump in on that. And I want to kind of pick up on some of the points that we've heard earlier about sort of, housing supply overall and policies that, are designed to increase that through various forms of upzoning. I thought that Tina made a great point that this kind of work takes a lot of political capital on the part of local leaders. And I wonder kind of from where you all sit as practitioners, is it worth it? Or are there other things that you'd like to see lawmakers investing in that would help free you up to continue doing your work?
I'll take a stab at that one.
All right. It's a big one. Thank you.
So the political capital that gets invested in delivering the projects that we do is absolutely worth it. The benefits not only to the people who get to live in those communities, but the redevelopment, economic development benefits cannot be understated. That being said, in Virginia, we are lacking in a lot of local authority because we are a Dillon Rule state. And for those of you that were wondering how long it would take to mention the Dillon Rule,
We did it, folks.
I hope you took the under. So I would like to see investment at the state level in providing a lot more flexibility for us here at the local level to design and implement local solutions, frankly, like HUD has through the Moving to Work program.
Yeah, and so upzoning specifically too. I wonder if Ken or Joe, you want to jump in here. How useful is new missing middle regulation or ordinances, that kind of thing to your work overall, or would you like to see? That's really been the focus locally here, right? Is, missing middle and, zoning for housing in Alexandria, et cetera. So, how do you see that fitting in with your work? Or is it, maybe less relevant to you? Either of you?
I can. I can just relay an experience, which was, at the council. Before we worked on this housing production fund, I worked with my then boss on an ADU bill. And, that bill was a lot harder. And, when I look, now that it's been 5 years, it's produced a lot less housing. I still think it was worth doing, and it's it was a good outcome. But I think it's, a really valid question. I do think one of the advantages of focusing on the financing and then having, sort of the government have control of that to some degree is, getting to, do all the community development things that Tom mentioned. And so, putting these projects in the communities that actually really need and want them and haven't seen new development. Or being able to, go to the community and include, in an upcoming project, we're planning to include a county library as one of the, kind of main retail pieces. So being able to co-locate amenities And at least so far on these projects, we've avoided any kind of public or community backlash because the zoning is in place and there are places where they really want investment and development.
One of the things that makes the early pre-development costs less is the fact that if you don't have to have a lawyer that's going to spend 12 years, 8 months, and 6 days trying to get a rezoning effort done. So having that legislation on the front end, having the opportunity that helps the houses of worship to be able to then be able to move forward and to help to hone their development concept plan, even as they're looking to bring in a development partner. And it's been critical, like I mentioned the district, I mentioned Montgomery County, and if those things can be in place, because what you can do by right is far more, we all know that housing is hard. Like I say, easier. If what you can do by right is so much helpful and so much of a better glide path than having to try to figure out. I had a church in Prince George's County that had 27 acres. And once they got the market analysis feasibility study and realized that only 16 of it was going to be able to be developed, and then when they realized where they were zoned, they were like frozen like a deer in headlights. And we had to get them to be able to have a conversation with the housing department in Prince George's to say, here's a possible glide path for you to be able to do this as you're moving forward in that. And what happens with houses of worship and faith folk, when they get quote unquote like frozen, then they have what we call, what's it called? The analysis of paralysis of analysis, whatever. Yeah, and they keep going through and having these conversations internally, and it's like cyclical, and then they go nowhere. So I think it's important to have some of those things in place, up front.
Yeah. Let me pick up on another sort of broad tension that I think Mike and Tina brought forward and that I know is, just sort of in the professional work of probably everyone in this room. And that is, the housing crisis in this region is so severe that it is now impacting both very low income people all the way up to people that we would generally consider extremely privileged. And so I wonder, you basically are sort of attacking these two problems that are related, but they are still two distinct problems: housing supply and committed affordable housing. And I wonder, how you three sort of think about that challenge of balancing those two issues in your work. Tom, you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure, thank you. One of the things that's really challenging about that conversation is the idea that affordable housing is affordable housing and workforce housing, so-called, is for working people. As everybody in this room knows, the people who are in affordable housing are among the hardest working members of our community. And our community, our economy needs the people who need affordable housing. That being said, we are having, very much that same discussion in Fairfax County. And as a matter of fact, a week ago, 2 weeks ago today, the Board of Supervisors effectively updated their guidance to us in terms of, in addition to our 10,000 new unit goal for people earning 60% of the median income and below, also looking at new ideas and new ways to deliver starter homes for first-time home buyers to address the needs of moderate income working families. So, this is, it's very much something that we're recognizing. It's also something where we're prepared to use all the tools at our disposal to be able to begin to address that need in a more deliberate manner as well.
Great.
And Tom hit on something earlier about being creative and the opportunity. And everyone knows that if you really want to make an affordable housing project work, you're going to have to put some market rate with it. That's just the reality. And if you really want to make it work, so you can address the both and then you have to tier, the AMI that you're looking at to do so that you can make it pencil out. But I believe, especially in our region, we had a project that's coming online on S Street in the Shaw area, one of the most gentrified zip codes in our country. And it took, y'all ready? It took 6 partners to come together to make this deal pencil out.
Wow.
6.
Yeah. So just as a final question, and that's also your signal, if you have not submitted your questions to Jill, please do so now. So none of this work obviously is happening in a vacuum. We've referenced sort of obliquely federal policy changes, tariffs affecting construction, changes at HUD. These things are sort of part of the water that you're swimming in right now. So I wonder if you can, share any advice or thinking that you have at this point about, how you are navigating these different projects that you have going on through some of the shifting federal landscape at this point. Who wants to take that one?
Government won't say it, but I will. You need to pray. No, I'm being real. I'm being real. I mean, there's a level of frustration that comes with this and all the things that are swirling around. And as I say to my congregants on Sunday morning, you got to learn how to keep your head about you when the others are losing theirs and blaming it on you. And you really have to be able to find something that you can help to keep chopping wood. That's what we tell our faith leaders. In the midst of this, you got to keep chopping wood. If anybody's ever chopped wood, you know that you get a bunch of splinters on the ground. Those splinters can then become kindle that can help to keep the flame going when the fire wants to go out.
Oh, he did bring the preacher voice, in fact. Ken or Tom, that's a hard act to follow.
Amen.
Perhaps from a less divine perspective, what I would say is that there are still partners at the federal level who are trying every day to do the right thing. And we, at the local level, we work very hard to put them in a position to be successful as well. And how do we do that? We make sure that we do all of our reporting requirements, all of the sort of nuts and bolts stuff that you have to do to work with federal money so that they don't have a problem themselves. I think trying to be a good partner to them in very difficult times is important. I think also, don't allow the situation at the federal government to stifle your creativity. There are dozens of people in this room who are doing incredibly creative things every day in affordable housing with federal resources. So, my advice, I think, would be don't get discouraged. Keep moving. Keep chopping wood.
All right, Jill.
Thank you. Thank you all. Let's give them a round of applause. I think it was a great conversation. Really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for your thoughts. So excellent questions. You all are doing a great job, and I wish we had even more time to do this. So again, if we don't get to your question, I'll suggest you find these fine people and ask them yourself, but it's good. The first question that came in really is one of my favorites because I feel like we all need an answer to this too, and Margaret, maybe you as well. You're at a dinner party, and someone asks what you do, and then starts to expressing NIMBY views, anti-development views. What do you say? What's your standard answer? And I think that's really important because I think it happens to all of us at some point or another. So do any of you have any ideas when you are meeting with someone outside of work and they ask you what you're doing, and what do you share? What's your words of wisdom?
Well, for those of you that know me in the audience, I'm kind of an introvert, so I never go to parties. But, I think, as with any disagreement, listening respectfully and responding thoughtfully. And, facts are facts, and, they have a funny way of remaining what they are. So, thoughtful contemplation, respectful response, or just stay home.
Anyone else?
I think just sharing the truth about the cost burden of housing, and from a compassionate way. And you know, like Tom said, you're not going to be argumentative. It's not about debating, but it's about the numbers are the numbers. And if there are people who are spending more than 50% of their income on their housing, that's real, and that's a burden.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of parties the question asker is going to, but I would just say that, from my perspective, I hear more people talking about how hard it is to find housing these days. I feel like it's more often that I'm commiserating with someone than sort of trying to understand a perspective that maybe is not in my experience. Yeah, Jill.
Okay, I'm going to have some clarifying questions for each of you, and I'll try to do more of a speed round, so you can just be brief in your answers. But I think some of our audience members had some great follow-up questions. So I will start with you, Ken. Can you talk just a little bit about the split, the 70-30 split on market to affordable, how you landed on that as appropriate, and then also what income levels are being served on the affordable side?
Sure. So the base requirement is 30% affordable, 20% serving households at 50% AMI or below, and then the remaining 20% is our inclusionary zoning. So that's generally about 60 to 65% AMI. There's like some weird nuance there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, no, that's helpful. So I will turn it to Tom and some questions about increasing Fairfax County's affordable housing blueprint funding, trust fund funding that we have in Fairfax. Seattle was mentioned, their $170 million offering. Loudoun County was mentioning with their recently dedicated increase to $17 million in their housing fund. And what do we need to do in Fairfax to increase the amount there?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to again thank everybody in the room who advocated for the increase that we did get in last year's budget. We went from 1 penny of the value of the real estate tax in Fairfax County to 1 1/8 penny. I think continued sustained advocacy is absolutely the key. And also, I'm a firm believer that kind of investment follows success. So as we open up these new projects, as we continue to show that the board invests, the money gets committed, the project goes up. That is really critical, just sustaining the success that we've had so that the board members can see that what they are getting for the investment that they're making. So those two things are really absolutely critical, but most of all, sustained advocacy.
Great, thank you. A question for all of you, I guess, is to what extent are you in your work asking local regional employers, besides Amazon, to invest in affordable housing production? So what's your work look like in engaging with the corporate sector to be supporters of affordable housing or faith-based housing?
Well, we certainly, in terms of private philanthropy, have been working diligently with financial institutions, banks, and they have been a critical part of being able to fund our FBDI work. And so we tap into those financial institutions, those CRE dollars and the like, and be able to make sure that we're able to utilize them.
Yeah, so in addition to working with any number of partners on the financing of our projects, we do have an affiliated nonprofit that collects donations and provides funding for programming for the residents in our homes, our customers, and so that's a major way that we do connect with a number of folks in the community to get them to give back and invest in our families.
Yeah, we're very effective at leveraging non-county dollars in our projects, but in terms of following the Amazon model, I feel like we're just getting started. Our board has given us very clear guidance that they want to see that replicated, that they want to see us, the entire county, working on bringing in more corporate partners.
Great, thank you. And just one more question, because I do want to stay on time, but just interested in your thoughts. I know we talked a little bit about working with the state, but just an interesting statistic that somebody put in, and I know we have other metrics to compare, but the Virginia State transportation budget is about $9 billion, with $4 billion going to highway construction. The State Affordable Housing Trust Fund is about $80 million per year. What are your thoughts on that, and how do we begin to change that? All off the record. This is all off the record.
If it makes you feel better, Maryland's is about the same.
Okay, thank you. We're not alone.
Sounds like that could use a little sunlight, perhaps.
Yeah, advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to end. Advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. So thank you so much again to our amazing panel. Before we break, we heard so much today, really, in a short 2-hour time frame. So I just want to welcome up to the podium Hillary Chapman, our NVAHA board member, Leadership Council member, and Housing Program Manager for the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. She's going to kind of help us wrap up what we heard, and then we can send you off to enjoy the reception. So thank you, Hillary.
Afternoon, and thank you everyone for being here with us. And can we just get another, okay, if I wrangle the microphone there. Sorry, can we just get another round of applause for our amazing panelists and our moderator? Yes, including our earlier panelists too, Dr. Tina Stacy and Mike Spott. So wonderful to be here with all of you this evening. I cannot possibly summarize all of the wonderful and thoughtful contributions that all of our panelists have shared today, but I hope that what you took away from today is really the remarkable symmetry between some of the policies and programs that we heard of best practices across the United States and even internationally. It's not just creating more housing supply, it's upzoning, land use reform, and affordability, and the importance of marrying those two things together in a really thoughtful way. Right, thinking about all the partners that we can bring in our, at both the local and the state level, right? State housing target policies are not as scary as they sound, right? So I hope we can take that with us as well. And that there are ways to create better, inclusive, and meaningful policies around equity and inclusion through first-generation homebuyer programs too. And I think when you look at the regional partners, the practitioners who are doing the work in our region, it's just incredible the contributions and the work and the innovation that's happening here. Right, we have two innovative, dynamic, and creative public agencies in HOC and Fairfax County. The ability to use those resources in a way that leverages the unique ability of local government and its partners to scale up and provide opportunity for housing at all income levels. And I hope that everyone here is learning how to become a gangster and not be gangstered through Joe's thoughtful mentorship and shepherding. And I think that's a great way to look at, too, the way in which we're able to do this. It's our partners, our community partners, our solution-based partners in the faith community, within the nonprofit community, resourceful and thoughtful organizations like Enterprise Community Partners, and working all together to find a way to address this really challenging problem from multiple perspectives. So again, I'm actually gonna quote Tom Fleetwood here, so I hope you don't mind. But just say, right, like, I think he just really summed it up quite well. And like, don't get discouraged, keep chopping the wood, keep moving forward, and advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. Thanks.
Thank you, Hillary. That was amazing. And just another thanks really to Hillary Chapman, Mike Spots, Hannah Matuda, Alice Hogan, and myself who really kind of shaped this Leckey Forum program today. So now, please go enjoy, network, ask more questions. We're going to start our awards program. It will be brief, just a half hour at 6:30, but we'll see you in the back. And thank you again for being here.